In this session, we will be talking about two concepts. One is the concept of environment and other is concept of environmental geography. Now, I'm sure that you all know or you have studied the concept of environment earlier. And so whenever we ask the meaning of environment, we always say that environment is all about surroundings. So environment includes all those things. It can be natural or human or cultural that are surrounded or that surrounds us. So all that includes or all that is referred as environment. But we need to be very clear that when we use the word surrounding, it is very necessary to ask the question that surroundings of whom we are asking. Because this question is very important. Because when we say that environment is about surroundings, it means that there is somebody at the center of it who is surrounded by environment, right? So when we say the environment or when we look at environment as surrounding, we should remember that we are talking about an individual. This individual not necessarily is a human being. This individual can be an individual plant. It also can be an individual animal. Or, as I said, it can be an individual human being. So finally, we should understand that environment is individual-centric concept, right? And because and when we say that environment changes, environment undergoes change, now that undergoes change also because the location of that individual also changes. So when human beings move from one place to another place, their environment undergoes change because environment is surrounding of that particular individual. So this is a very significant aspect that we should know. So individuals are surrounded by their environment, which can be physical or it can be social. So this is a very significant point that we all should know. Now, is it that nature and environment both are the same? Obviously, if you have understood the concept of environment, you will give the answer to this question as obviously no. Nature and environment, though many times these terms are used as synonyms, we should know that they are not the same. When we say nature, we are basically talking about nature in absolute terms. So we are talking about all different components of nature in absolute terms. But when we say environment, it refers particularly to the individual whose surrounding we are talking about. So every plant has its own environment, every animal has its own environment, every human being has its own environment. Okay, and I mean not just living organisms, but even abiotic elements or non-living objects or elements also have their environment. So a piece of rock also has an environment that plays a very significant role in the making of that rock, right? So it can be a living object or an entity, or it can be a non-living object. Both has environment, right? So environment is individual centric. So who is at the center of the environment? Who is the focus of the concept of environment? It is individual, right? And therefore, why I am stressing this, that is the reason why when we say that we want to conserve environment, we should remember that it means that we want to conserve ourselves. Why most of the time the awareness of environmental conservation fails? Because we feel that environment is all about surroundings. So it is not something about me, it is not something about us, but it is something about surrounding. But that's the wrong notion of environment. Because unless there is an individual at the center, there is no meaning to the word surrounding. right? And therefore, when I say that I want to conserve environment, I mean that I want to conserve my surrounding. And why I want to conserve my surrounding? Because it affects me. And therefore, environmental conservation is conservation of self. It is a conservation of individual. It is a conservation of human being. So environment conservation is not about something else or some object which is not me, but it is entirely about myself. It is entirely about, it is entirely about self, right? So environment is surrounding, but surrounding of an individual. As I said, that individual can be a living entity or a non-living object, and nature and environment are not the same. Now let's see how environment is defined by different people. Now, Fitting in 1922 defined environment as a totality of milieu factors of an organism. What is milieu factor? Milieu factor includes all those physical, social elements in which we are functioning. So it's all talk about the physical, social setting of an organism. And totality is putting all of them together. This is very important. It's not one element of environment that affects us, but all of them in totality, right? For example, if you're sitting in a classroom, so you're surrounded by your friends, but you're also surrounded by many non-living things, such as the benches, such as the walls, such as the table and chairs, etc. All this put together becomes the part of your environment. You're also surrounded by certain things which or otherwise we are not very conscious of. For example, there is light all around. There are so many dust particles floating in the air around us. All these put together is a part of environment, right? So it's a totality of milieu factors of an organism. That is how Fitting defines it in 1922. Tansley in 1926 defines environment as the sum total of those effective conditions in which organisms live. So this definition seems similar to what Fitting was talking about. But remember here the question is in which organisms live. So these are all the conditions that surrounds us, that determines or that influences, that affects living, affects the life of organisms. Again, as when we say organisms, we are talking about plants, we are talking of animals, and obviously human beings, which are also a part of animals. So all these things put together. So this word sum total is very important. Then Herskovits in 1948 says that environment is a sum total of all those external conditions and influences which affect the life and development of human beings. Now, this definition is different. This definition is not talking about organisms in general, but this definition particularly talks about human beings. Sum total of all those external conditions. External conditions here mean that outside of my body. So external conditions include everything which is not my body, right? So outside of my body, whatever things are living or non-living, all these things put together, right, becomes a part of my environment, and these conditions influence or affect the life of human beings and obviously the development of human beings. So this is more a human-centric definition of environment. Park in 1980 defines environment as sum of all conditions which surround human race. Now, till this point, we already have seen in the earlier definition, but see what Park is adding. Sum of all conditions which surround human race at a fixed place and time. Why Park's definition is important? Because here we are learning about the meaning of the term environment, not as, we are looking at what environment means, not as a sociologist, not as an environmental scientist, not as as a psychologist, right? But basically as geographer. And this is very important. I mean, so therefore, I mean, if from which subject you are looking at, from which perspective you are talking about the meaning of environment, that is very important. And here we are sitting, trying to understand the meaning of environment from geographical point of view. And therefore, what Park is saying is very important. That last part of definition, sum of all conditions which surrounds us at a fixed place and time, right? So at this point, when you're listening to the session or you're watching this session, okay, you are at fixed location, and there is certain time of the day or certain time of the night you are watching this session, right? So there is certain environment around you, right? If you are watching it at the night, there will not be any natural light, there will be dark, but there can be artificial light. But if you are watching the session during the day, right, so there will be natural light around you. It means that at what place, at what time, okay, that these factors become very important in understanding environment. So as I was mentioning you earlier, environment not only changes because the location of the individual changes, but environment also changes because the time and place also differs, also changes, right? So normally when we say the change in environment, we say yes, so throughout the year there are different seasons, and from season to season environment change. That is fine, but we should know that environment changes every second, because every time there is change around you. So that becomes extremely important aspect, right, to know the concept of environment. Okay, so according to me, in all these definitions, the definition by Park is more important because it indicates how a geographer looks at the concept of environment. So I hope you have understood the meaning of environment. Now, lastly, we'll talk about the meaning of environmental geography. Now, it's very simple. We all know that geography is broadly divided into physical and human geography. And then physical and human geography both have their sub-branches, right? And environmental geography is one of the branch of physical geography. Now, certain texts you will find also say that environmental geography is a branch of human geography, right? It is mainly because the environmental geography deals with both. It deals with physical as well as it deals with human, okay? Because just now we have seen that environment is the surrounding of an individual, right? And therefore, environment cannot purely deal with only physical environment or only cultural environment, but it deals with both. Now, to therefore give a very simple definition of environmental geography, we can say that environmental geography is a branch of physical geography that studies environment with a geographical perspective, right? Because the environment can be studied with a sociological perspective. It can be studied with historical perspective, right? Or even in the natural sciences also, environment can be studied from the perspective of physics or chemistry or biology, right? So here when we say environmental geography, we mean that we are talking about environment with geographical perspective or spatial perspective. When we say geographical perspective, the first question is very significant that we ask. Geographer always starts the inquiry with the question where, because geographers are interested in the location. So when we say environment of an individual, our first question will be, what is the location of that environment? I mean, what is the location of that individual? Because the location itself will determine the kind of surrounding of that individual piece, right? So when we say studying environment with geographical perspective, it means asking questions like where, right? So we are talking about location. When we talk about location, we talk about different locational attributes of environment. We also talk about the distribution. We also talk about the patterns, right? So when we say where, we talk about location, distribution, and the pattern that is created by that distribution. And then we go and try to find out the question of how and why. Then why it is so? Why an environment of a particular location is such? Why it is not in some other way, right? So when we study environment in geographical perspective, we look at environment as we have seen in Park's definition, place specific, and how it changes from place to place, right? And place and time cannot be separated. So obviously it is from at specific place and time, and how it changes over from place to place and from time to time. Okay. So if it is difficult to memorize the definitions given by different geographers or environmentalists, a simple definition is that environmental geography studies environment with a, or environmental geography is a branch of geography that studies environment with a geographical perspective or with a spatial perspective. That can be simple definition. But to give some specific definition, then we can talk about 1982 definition by Botkin and Keller, who says that environmental geography is a study of life and life's environment. Remember this. And why that word life is important? Because I just now said that environment is individual centric. Okay, so there is a plant, there is an animal, there is a human being at the center, and we cannot forget that. We cannot forget the individual. We cannot talk of environment without an individual. And therefore, environmental geography studies life and the surroundings of life, right? And so, when we start discussing environmental geography, we talk about different spheres. So we talk about how the life is surrounded by different spheres such as hydrosphere, atmosphere, lithosphere, etc. Right, and how it leads to the making of the biosphere, right, which we will be studying in upcoming sessions, right? So basically, it is necessary to understand that environmental geography studies life and whatever is surrounded. Okay, so that is very significant. That is what Botkin and Keller is talking about. In 2010, Alka Gautam definition, which is a basic text that we are following at UG level, Alka Gautam's book on environmental geography. And in that book, Alka Gautam mentions this definition that environment, you will feel it is long definition, but it actually talks about the same things that we had talked about earlier. So if you want, you can break it into smaller sentences also. Let's see what she is talking about. So Alka Gautam says that environmental geography is a study of spatial attributes. Spatial is geographical attributes, location, distribution, pattern based attributes of interrelationship between living organisms and natural environment, right? For example, an animal located in a desert, in a hot desert, and an animal located in a rainforest, right? That animal interact with the surrounding environment differently. Not that even if you take two different deserts, both are hot deserts, still you will find the interrelationship between living organism and the surrounding natural environment differs, though it is hot desert only. But just because where the hot deserts are located, that plays a very significant point. And therefore, it is not just that environment changes, but the interrelationship between and among living organisms and with natural environment also undergoes change, right? So I repeat, environmental geography is a study of spatial attributes of interrelationship between living organisms and natural environment in general. So this is one part. And between study of spatial attributes of interrelationship between man and natural environment in particular. So environmental geography not just talk about human and environment relationship, but it also talks about the relationship between the living organisms and natural environment in general. And to be specific, it talks about the interrelationship between human beings and their natural environment. And as you can see in the last part says, in particular spatial and temporal framework. This is what Park was talking about. Okay, at fixed place and at fixed time. Okay, and as you change the place and change the time, the environment undergoes change. The nature of interrelationships also undergo change. So all this is studied in environmental geography, right? So I hope that to end this session, you might have noted one important point, that how environmental geography is dynamic in nature, right? Because environment is not remain the same. You're sitting in one room in your house. Okay, after watching the session, you may move into the other room of your house. So your environment is changing. The people around you may change, right? The non-living objects around you will change. Okay, so the concept of environment is fundamentally a geographical, because it is tied up to its location of an individual. So as the location of the individual changes, environment changes, right? And environment geography studies this kind of environment which is dynamic. So obviously the subject or the branch of environmental geography also becomes dynamic, right? So I hope you understood. And we had talked about what is environment in this session. And we also talked about what do we mean by environmental geography. Right? If any doubt, then you can very much connect or get in touch with me. Thanks a lot.